Lynn Zimmo once told me I was unlovable. It was a rainy Thursday night, pouring heavily, and we stood in the stairwell of the apartment he rented. He said, "You're too much to love. Anyone who falls for you will end up exhausted." I didn't cry, nor did I beg him. I pulled the key out of my bag, placed it in his hand, and walked straight into the rain. That was 3 years ago. One afternoon 3 years later, he sent me a message asking to meet. He said he'd finally figured things out, that he'd been wrong back then, and that he wanted us to get back together. We sat down in a cafe. He talked at length. When he finished, I neither agreed nor refused. I simply turned my phone screen toward him and let him look. He stared at it for about 10 seconds, his expression slowly fading. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm too late. I started dating Lynn Zimmo when I was 23. I just worked for a year, employed as an editorial assistant at a magazine. My salary was low, I lived in a partitioned rental room, squeezed the subway every morning, and stayed up late revising manuscripts until my eyes ached every night." He was introduced to me by a college friend. Back then, he worked as a copywriter at an advertising agency. Witty and talkative, he told countless stories I'd never heard before. He had a trait that easily drew me in back then, an effortless ease, as if nothing bothered him, as if life came simply and lightly to him. I was nothing like him. I was always anxious, tensed up over every little thing. I feared making mistakes at work, feared misstepping in every relationship, and even loved someone with extreme caution, terrified that one wrong move would make him stop loving me. At first, our differences complemented each other. Eventually, they only wore us down. He grew tired of my over-seriousness. I would dwell on a trivial matter for 3 days, and he'd ask, "Is it really necessary?" He grew tired of my sensitivity. A casual comment from him would linger in my mind for a week as I overanalyzed it, and he'd sigh, "Can't you stop exhausting yourself like this?" He grew tired of how much space I took up in his life. When he was busy and replied to my messages slowly, I'd ask what he was doing, and he'd retort, "I didn't think relationships were supposed to be like this." I knew I had flaws. I tried to change, sent fewer messages, asked fewer questions, cared less, shrank myself smaller and smaller to make things easier for him. But the more I shrank myself, the bigger the empty void inside me grew. He was the one who ended things on that rainy Thursday night. He'd run into trouble at work and was in a terrible mood. I went to see him with his favorite food. When he opened the door, there was no gratitude on his face, only a weary sigh. "Can you stop showing up unannounced? I'm swamped right now. I just need to be alone." I set the food down. "Then I'll stay with you quietly." "I won't say a word." "That's the problem," he said. "Your quiet company is still pressure. Do you know what you feel like to other people?" He paused, then said the words that broke me, "You're too much. Anyone who loves you will wear themselves out." He went on to say we were incompatible, that he'd felt off about us for a long time, that he'd only ever settled for this relationship. Settled for it. Those 4 words hurt far more than being told I was unlovable. They turned 2 years of our lives into a mistake, casting doubt on every good memory I'd once believed was real. I walked out of his apartment and stood in the stairwell as the rain poured down. I placed his key in his hand, said nothing, and stepped into the downpour. I walked until my legs went weak, then sat down at a bus stop. The rain soaked me completely, yet I didn't shed a single tear. It wasn't strength. In that moment, I felt something deeper than sorrow. I couldn't name it exactly, like suddenly realizing I'd worn myself down into an unrecognizable shape for a relationship, and even then, I still hadn't been enough to stay. The first year after the breakup was brutal. It wasn't because I missed him. It was because his words haunted me, "Anyone who loves you will wear themselves out." I began to doubt myself, growing timid in every relationship. I turned down friends' invitations, afraid of being a burden, until they stopped asking me out. I never said no to colleagues' requests for help, pushing through exhaustion to assist them, then seethed with unspoken grievance afterward. Living alone back then, I'd stare at my reflection every morning and see the word burden written all over my face. That was when I met Guran. Our meeting was nothing dramatic. She was my new neighbor. On her moving day, She knocked on my door to borrow a screwdriver for assembling her bookshelf. I lent it to her, and when she returned it, she brought me 2 oranges with a bright smile, simply saying, "Thanks, neighbor," before leaving. We grew close gradually. She worked as an interior designer at an architecture firm, straightforward and unreserved in her words. One day, we sat chatting on a bench in the community garden, and before I knew it, I told her what Lynn Zimmo had said, that loving me was exhausting. She fell silent for 2 seconds, then asked, "Do you believe him?" I didn't answer, and that was answer enough. "If you believe that, you're letting an unworthy person dictate how you see yourself," she said. I froze. "When he said you're unlovable, it wasn't the truth about you," she explained. "It was just an excuse for him to shirk his responsibility. You made him feel pressured, and he couldn't handle it. Instead of admitting that, he twisted it to make it your fault." I sat on that bench for a long time, replaying her words over and over in my head. For the first time in 3 years, someone gave me a different interpretation of what had happened. It wasn't that I was unlovable. It was that he didn't want to love me, and he needed a decent excuse to leave. Those are 2 entirely different things. After that day, I started a small practice that changed everything for me. I started keeping track of myself. It wasn't a diary. Guran suggested it. She told me that when she was stressed, she'd write down her small victories in her phone notes, no matter how trivial, even simply "I didn't oversleep today" counted. I decided to try it. My first note read, "A colleague asked me to revise her manuscript today." I said no, told her I had my own work to finish, and asked her to wait. I stared at that line for a long time after writing it. I knew I could never have done that before. In the past, I would have dropped everything to help her, leaving my own work for overtime hours and finishing it with a heavy heart. Slowly, my notes grew more numerous, detailed, and diverse. I went to an art exhibition alone today. I stood and watched a painting in the 3rd hall for 20 minutes, with no one rushing me. I told Guran exactly what I thought today, without overthinking whether she'd like it. It felt so light afterward. I made a mistake at work today. I didn't spend the whole night spiraling in anxiety. I fixed the problem, treated myself to a nice meal, and slept well. When someone asked if I was free this weekend, I first thought about what I wanted, instead of immediately saying yes. One note after another, I collected them like pieces of evidence to rebuild myself. Sometime along the way, I looked in the mirror and no longer saw a burden staring back at me. The 2nd year, I quit my job at the magazine and became a planning editor at a publishing house. My salary rose significantly, and though the work rhythm was different, I found my whole mindset had changed. When problems arose, my first reaction was no longer "what did I do wrong?" but to assess the situation and figure out how to fix it. That year, I entered another relationship. His name was Chung Xing, a lawyer at a law firm. We met at a friend's gathering. He was a man of few words, but every sentence he spoke was thoughtful and precise. We hung out 3 times before he asked me to give us a try on our 4th meeting. I didn't agree right away. I thought about it for 2 days and talked to Guran about it, asking for her opinion. "What do you think of him?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet," I replied, "but when he listens to me, he truly hears me. He doesn't just wait for me to finish talking." "Then give it a shot," she said. Ching Xing and I were together for 8 months. We split up with no hard feelings. His job required him to relocate to another city. We talked it through thoroughly and parted ways peacefully. This breakup was nothing like the last one. 3 years prior, I'd sat alone in the rain for hours, broken and convinced I was irreparable. This time, the night before he left, we talked through all the good times we'd shared. In the end, he said, we were both good to each other. I nodded in agreement, and we went our separate ways. That night, I wrote myself a note. I cried today after saying goodbye to Chung Xing, but I know I am still whole. In the 3rd year after my breakup with Lynn Zimmo, Gu Ran moved out to live with her boyfriend. On moving day, we stood at the community gate. She handed me a cloth bag filled with small trinkets. "We won't be neighbors anymore," she said, "but don't ever stop calling me." "You still owe me a screwdriver," I teased. She froze for a second, then laughed. "Fine, I'll keep that debt and pay you back someday." After she left, I returned to my new apartment alone and opened the cloth bag. Inside was a small notebook. On the cover, she'd written in bold marker, "For you, no need of saving, but utterly worthy of love." I placed the notebook on my desk and sat there for a long while, letting the words sink in. No tears came, only quiet, gentle acceptance. Utterly worthy of love. For nearly a year after the breakup, I'd clung to Lynn Zimmo's cruel words, shrinking myself small and timid, convinced I was unlovable. Now I finally believed otherwise. Lynn Zimmo's message came on an ordinary weekday afternoon that autumn. "How have you been lately?" I stared at the message for 2 seconds. Instead of replying immediately, I flipped my phone over, finished reviewing my manuscript, then picked it back up and typed a simple reply, "I'm doing fine. It's been years. Can we meet up? I have a lot I want to say to you." I hesitated briefly, then asked, "About what?" "It's better to talk in person." I could have refused, but I didn't. It wasn't because I still had feelings for him. I just wanted to see him, not to reconcile, but to stand in front of the man who once made me believe I was worthless, and let him see the me I'd become. I wanted to prove to myself that his words no longer held any weight over me. We arranged to meet at a cafe on a weekend afternoon. He arrived early and sat by the window. When I walked in, he stood up. He looked different from 3 years ago. His gaze was no longer casual and frivolous, carrying a new layer of gravity. I sat down and ordered a coffee, waiting for him to speak. He talked endlessly. He told me how tough his past 3 years had been, how he'd switched jobs twice, how another relationship had fallen apart. He said it was during that relationship that he'd realized how wrong he'd been to me. He insisted he'd sorted out his feelings, that his harsh words had stemmed from his own flaws, not mine. He said we were always compatible and that he wanted to start over. I listened quietly the entire time, no interruptions, no change in expression. When he finished, he looked at me, waiting for my response. I neither agreed nor refused. I took out my phone, opened a page, and turned the screen toward him, sliding it across the table. He stared at it for roughly 10 seconds. It was my phone's note app.